Madison yanked my handbag out of my hand and whispered just loud enough for only me to hear. "You're only good at one thing, getting in the way. Stay here and think about your worth." Then she turned around and walked straight into the security gate at Dubai Airport, carrying my passport, my wallet, and my phone. 3 a.m. I stood alone in a sea of strangers. As I trembled and approached an airport security officer, a man in a gray suit stepped forward, leaned in, and said, "If you don't want to be detained, take my hand right now and pretend to be my wife." I looked into his eyes, and I knew my life was about to turn in a direction I could never have imagined. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I never thought the night I set foot in Dubai, a city I had only ever seen on TV, would become the moment that determined the rest of my life. I, Helen Caraway, 69 years old, once a hotel manager in Dallas for more than 3 decades, once a capable, level-headed, composed woman. Yet that night I stood shaking like a lost child in a shopping mall, all because of a daughter I had spent my whole life loving and sacrificing for. Madison wasn't born unkind. She grew up without a father after his sudden death, but the love I gave her never wavered for a single day. Still, the older she got, the more she changed. Short-tempered, selfish, obsessed with control. I always thought it was the result of growing up without a father, and I tried to compensate in every way I could. Maybe I enabled her too much. This trip had been pitched as a mother-daughter vacation, she suggested, saying she wanted to reconnect. I remember how happy I was when Madison said that. I thought, my daughter wanted to come back to me. But from the moment we boarded the plane, every hope crumbled, little by little. "Stop asking, Mom. Please stop asking," Madison snapped, when I simply wondered about the layover time. "Oh my God, don't embarrass me," she sighed when I instinctively held her shoulder while walking through the crowded immigration area. Every word, every glance from her felt like another cut. But the moment she snatched my bag, grabbed all my documents, and walked away without looking back. That was something I knew I would remember until my last breath. When the man in the gray suit appeared, I couldn't tell if I was terrified, angry, or numb. I only remember one thing. In that moment, the way he looked at me wasn't pity, and it wasn't curiosity. It was the look of someone who understood exactly the situation I was trapped in, as if he had once stood where I stood. My wallet was taken. My daughter... I stammered, my mind completely blank. Security officers in the distance were beginning to notice me. The questions, the procedures, the explanations about having no passport, no documents, it all felt like a nightmare. I wasn't even sure they would believe me. And I didn't want to be taken into some back room for questioning while my mind was falling apart. "You need help," the stranger said, his voice low and steady. "And I need help from you." I looked at him, trying to grasp the meaning behind his words, but he didn't give me time to figure it out. He gently but firmly took my hand and guided me toward the priority passenger area. I felt like I was floating in shock, letting a stranger lead me as if he knew exactly who I was. As we neared the VIP exit, he finally told me the truth. "I'm Amir Al-Nasser. If you agree to act as my wife for the next few hours, I'll make sure you're safe until you get your documents back." I froze. "I pretend to be your wife?" I repeated, almost choking. "Only on paper. I need to appear with an older woman to avoid suspicion during a meeting tonight, and you need to leave this airport without trouble." I wanted to refuse. God, any normal person would refuse, But I wasn't normal at that moment. I was a 69-year-old woman who had just been abandoned by her own daughter in a foreign airport at 3 a.m., with no money, no documents, no phone, and no one to call. I was desperate, and desperation makes people accept things they would have called insane just hours earlier. I don't want any trouble, I said, my voice trembling. If you go with me, no one will bother you, he said firmly. I give you my word. I won't harm you. I only need you to be beside me. Before I could say another word, he glanced toward security approaching us and quickly said, "Make a decision. Helen Caraway." I flinched. How did he know my name? Your bag had a name tag, he explained gently, as if reading my thoughts. I stood there, a woman in shock, and then I nodded. One nod that changed my entire fate. We passed through security far more smoothly than I expected. Moments earlier, I had been trembling like a stranded traveler in the desert. Yet now, I was sitting inside a sleek, black limousine, curtains drawn, cool air humming softly, my hands still shaking because I could not believe what was happening. Amir sat across from me, eyes closed for a moment as he loosened his tie. When he opened them, his gaze locked onto mine, and he said a sentence that sent a chill down my spine. Your daughter will regret abandoning you. I guarantee it. I didn't know what his definition of regret was, but there was something in his voice, something that told me he had known betrayal, humiliation, and loneliness to the bone. I felt myself teetering somewhere between fear and an odd sense of trust toward this man. I don't understand why you're doing this, I admitted. Amir inhaled deeply. Because I know how it feels, he said. The feeling of being abandoned by the person you love most. I didn't ask further, partly because I was exhausted and partly because the small dignity I had left, shattered by Madison, was trying to help me stay composed. I turned to the window, staring through the tinted glass at the bright Dubai skyline, like a world I had never prepared to enter. Yet somehow, life had led me here, and I could feel this car was carrying me far from the life I once thought I was bound to. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing. I, Helen Caraway, had just stepped into the most life-altering turn of my journey. I thought I was dreaming when the limousine left the main highway and turned onto a private road leading deep into Palm Crescent. Palm trees trimmed to perfection lined both sides, golden lights washing over each leaf, like a painting crafted with patience and wealth. I wondered what on earth I was doing in a place so luxurious I'd never even imagined it. But the car kept moving, as if an invisible hand was pulling me toward a door I wasn't ready to open. A mansion appeared at the end of the road, so large it took my breath away. 2 black iron gates opened silently, as if they had been waiting for the exact moment I arrived. The entire front facade glowed under warm amber lights, reflecting beautifully off the white stone walls, making the place resemble a palace more than a home. I glanced at Amir, but he showed no hint of pride. To him, this was simply home. But to me, it was an entirely different world. The car stopped at the entrance. The door opened before I could move. A small-framed, kind-faced, middle-aged woman stood waiting. She wore a long-sleeved cream blouse and a thin shawl, polished yet warm. "Welcome home, sir," she said in flawless American English. Then she turned to me, her expression softening. "And welcome, ma'am. I'm Lena." Part of me wanted to explain that I wasn't the ma'am of this house, that I was just a woman abandoned and lucky enough to be brought here by some strange twist of fate. But there was something so gentle in Lena's eyes that I couldn't protest. I only nodded as if too drained to correct anything. Lena has taken care of this home for 20 years, Amir said. If you need anything, just tell her. Lena smiled warmly, looking like someone used to comforting people fresh out of storms. I bowed my head slightly in gratitude, feeling like I had stepped into a shelter on a winter night. The mansion was so large, I felt like I was walking through a museum rather than someone's home. High ceilings, crystal chandeliers, cool stone floors, large paintings with rich colors lining the hallways. The space held a mix of Middle Eastern elegance and modern calm, remarkably balanced. I walked with my hands clasped tightly, afraid of disturbing something that wasn't mine. A soft scent of oud lingered in the air, reminding me I was far from the U.S., far from my old life, far from the woman I had been 12 hours earlier. Lena opened the door to a bright, spacious room. I froze. A large bed with crisp white sheets, a balcony overlooking the sea, a small sofa, and a wooden table with fresh flowers. Everything was too perfect for someone who had just endured one of the worst shocks of her life. I don't know what to say, I whispered. Lena smiled. Just rest, dear. You look exhausted. I nodded, but when she gently closed the door, the silence of the room became too much. I couldn't hold in my emotions any longer. Tears streamed down my face, not just from hurt, but from the unfamiliar feeling of being treated kindly after years of being dismissed. Madison had never called her selfishness selfishness. She called it asserting independence. I wiped my tears with my sleeve, ashamed of how fragile I felt. But the crying didn't stop. It felt like water finally washing the dust off a heart choked for too long. Being abandoned by my own daughter at an airport wasn't just cruelty. It was her final declaration that she no longer saw me as her mother. Not 10 minutes later, there was a gentle knock. I hurried to wipe my face. Amir stepped inside, holding a brand new phone, the box in Lena's hands behind him. I thought you might need this, he said, placing the silver phone in my palm. The SIM is activated. You can call the U.S. I looked at the phone as if it were a lifeline. Why are you doing all this for me? I asked, my voice raw. Because you need help, and... He paused, his expression shadowing. Because I know what it feels like to be betrayed by family. I gripped the phone, unsure how to thank him. All I felt was an overwhelming gratitude that tonight, in a foreign land, I'd met the right person at the right time. After Amir left, my hands trembled as I dialed my sister, Harper Caraway. She answered before the first full ring. Helen, oh my God, Helen, where are you? Madison said you disappeared. We thought you had an accident. My throat tightened. I didn't disappear, Harper. She left me. The line went silent for a moment. Then my sister exhaled heavily, like she had expected this for a long time but prayed she was wrong. Helen, you need to know something, Harper said softly. Before the trip, Madison went to our family attorney. She asked about filing for guardianship, declaring you mentally incompetent so she could control your assets. It felt like someone punched me in the chest. I had prepared myself for the idea that Madison no longer respected me. But this went beyond hurt. This was betrayal, calculated and cold. Harper, why would she do that? I whispered. I don't know, Helen. Maybe greed, maybe anger over her father's death. But clearly, she doesn't see you as her mother anymore. I sat in silence until Harper said the last thing. Helen, you have to protect yourself. When the call ended, my hands were ice cold. I sat on the edge of the bed, the room suddenly feeling twice as large, like it was swallowing me whole. Madison wanted to take control of my estate? Declare me incompetent. Me, the mother who loved her with everything I had. The pain wasn't slow, it was sharp, immediate. When I walked downstairs a while later, Amir was standing near the tall glass windows, staring out at the sea. He turned when he heard my footsteps, his expression gentler than I expected. "Are you all right?" he asked. I shook my head. My daughter told the entire family I vanished. Amir exhaled as if my story touched a wound he still carried. "Zayn, my son, did something similar," he said. "He told the board I was no longer fit to run the company. He wanted power, and he thought destroying my reputation was the fastest way." I looked at him, surprised by the strange sense of kinship. "So," I said softly, "you're helping me because you understand this." "Yes," Amir replied. "No pain cuts deeper than a parent being cast aside by their own child." He didn't say more, but that moment was enough for me to understand. The two of us, strangers from two different worlds, shared a kind of pain not everyone could grasp. I nodded, feeling for the first time that night that someone truly stood on my side, and maybe, for the first time in years, I didn't feel entirely alone. Lena appeared from the kitchen, placing a pot of light, fragrant chicken soup on the table. "Ma'am, you should eat something. You need your strength." It took me a few seconds to realize I hadn't eaten for many hours. I sat down, my hands still trembling. Amir didn't eat with me, but he stood nearby as if wanting to make sure I was all right. In that quiet space, I sensed the sincerity in him, without demands, without pressure. When the first spoonful of soup touched my lips, I nearly cried again, not from sadness, but from the feeling of being cared for after so many years of being the one who cared for others. That night, when I returned to my room and sat looking out at the vast, dark sea, I knew a new chapter had begun. Not a chapter I wanted or prepared for, but one I was being forced to step into. A stranger had pulled me away from the edge. My own daughter had pushed me toward it, and I told myself I was no longer the woman who would silently endure everything. I couldn't sleep after that dinner. My body felt as exhausted as if I had run through a storm, but my mind was terrifyingly alert. I stepped out onto the balcony, resting my hands on the cool stone railing. The night breeze from the Persian Gulf carried a salty scent and something foreign, reminding me I was half a world away from the United States. Below, the vast garden was lit by small golden lights hidden beneath the palm trees. Everything was so breathtaking it felt unreal, yet my heart was tangled like a knotted thread. My daughter had abandoned me. My sister had revealed a merciless truth, and now I was living in a stranger's home, a man whose name I learned only hours earlier. I was thinking about Madison when I heard a gentle knock. "Come in." Amir stepped inside, his hands in his pockets, his salt and pepper hair slightly messy, as if he had spent the evening wrestling with something heavy on his mind. "Am I disturbing you?" he asked. "No," I answered, adjusting my sleeve to hide my unease. He looked at me for a few seconds, as if weighing whether he should say what he came to say, then gave a slight nod. "I need to tell you something. Something personal." I stepped aside for him to enter. The door closed behind him, and the room turned quiet except for the sound of distant waves. "I have a feeling," I said, "that things between you and your son aren't just disagreements." Amir sat in the armchair near the window. The warm light cast across his face revealed lines of exhaustion I hadn't noticed earlier. My wife, Layla, he began quietly, passed away last year from cancer. The last 6 months felt like walking deeper into darkness every day. I did everything I could, but some battles simply cannot be won with money. I stood still, listening. Someone else's pain always softened me, especially when it echoed parts of my own story. Her death, he continued, made people around me smell the power vacuum, and the first person who tried to claim that space was Zane, his son. I remembered what he'd said earlier downstairs. No pain cuts deeper than a parent being cast aside by their own child. Zane wanted me to sign over power of attorney for the entire conglomerate, Amir explained. He said I was too broken to continue, that I needed rest and time to heal. He let out a bitter laugh. But he didn't want me to heal. He wanted me gone. I sat across from him, waiting. He brought a psychologist to the house, insisted I undergo a competency evaluation, he said, his voice steady but heavy. And right after that, I discovered he was preparing to petition the board to remove me as chairman because he paused, pain flickering openly in his eyes, because of signs of mental instability. I covered my mouth. Wounds between parents and children seem to echo the same patterns in every country. Amir inhaled deeply. I fought back, but the investor circle is not so easily convinced. I started to see where this was going. You see, Helen, he said, looking straight at me, in the business circles of the Middle East, an older man who stands alone, no family, no wife, is always viewed with suspicion. They fear instability. They fear a man like that will make decisions based on emotion rather than logic. I froze. Wealthy men had burdens of their own, and sometimes more expectations placed on them than on women. Amir stood and paced slowly. I'm negotiating a deal worth $450 million with 3 very traditional investors. They don't want to sign with a man who has no family. To them, a wife is not just a wife. She is proof of stability. He stopped in front of me. And tonight, he said, I saw you standing in that airport, empty-handed, trembling because your own daughter abandoned you. But in your eyes, I saw something I never once saw in the actresses I hired before. I stiffened. You hired? Yes. He didn't flinch. I tried hiring actresses a few times, but they act too much. Their eyes hold no truth. They can't show the one thing I need most. I swallowed. And I have that? Amir sat back down, leaning forward, elbows on his knees, as if confessing a fragile part of himself. You have real pain, he said slowly. A pain no one can fake. A pain that makes people believe. Silence filled the room, thick, heavy, undeniable. I could hear my heart, small, faint, yet more present than ever. So, what do you want me to do? I asked, my voice trembling. Amir didn't hesitate. I want you to pretend to be my wife, just for 48 hours. I nearly jumped from my seat. You're insane, I said bluntly, completely insane. He didn't argue. He only gave a small smile, a smile that admitted it yet accepted it as truth. I understand, he said, but I'm not asking for anything inappropriate. No personal matters, no intimacy. I only need you to appear at a dinner and a meeting as my wife. I shook my head, dizzy. Me? A 69-year-old woman from Ohio, abandoned at an airport by her own daughter, now pretending to be your wife? Do you know how absurd that sounds? Absurd, Amir agreed. But sometimes, absurdity is the only thing left. I pressed my palms to my knees, staring at the cold stone floor. I had no money, no passport, no place to go. My daughter saw me as disposable. and in front of me stood a stranger offering to help me survive the next few days if I helped him pretend. But what I heard most clearly was the number he said next. I'll provide housing, food, clothing, a phone, and I'll pay you $20,000 when it's over. $20,000. For me, it was more than a year of living expenses. For Madison, it might have meant nothing, but for a woman whose daughter was trying to declare her incompetent, it was a lifeline. He looked at me as if he didn't want to pressure me, but he wasn't stepping back either. I choose you, Amir said, his voice low and certain, because you don't have to act. The way you carry your pain, the way you still stand tall, that's what they need to see. I realized I was shaking, not from fear, but from knowing that whether I wanted it or not, I had no better path right now. I leaned back, closed my eyes for a moment. If I agree, I said slowly, I have conditions. Amir stood upright instantly like a soldier awaiting orders. I'm listening. First, I said, opening my eyes and looking straight at him, you do not touch me. Not accidentally, not on purpose. I will not let anyone think I'm a woman depending on a man to survive. I understand, Amir nodded. I respect that. Second, I continued, no one is allowed to harm my dignity. No one mentions my past or my family. No one treats me as some prop for your negotiation. I guarantee it, he said immediately. Your dignity will be protected as fiercely as my own. I let out a long breath. And third, my throat tightened. When this is over, you let me walk away without asking anything else from me. Amir looked at me for a long moment. In his eyes, I saw something hard to name: surprise, respect, and maybe compassion. You have my word, he said. That was it. No applause, no contract on the table, just two people with fractured hearts sitting quietly in a golden-lit room in Dubai, agreeing to a madness that could change both of our lives. As Amir reached the door, he paused and looked back at me. Helen, he said softly but clearly, from the moment you put your hand in mine at the airport, we both stepped into a game bigger than we realized. When the door closed, I stood in silence for a long time. Outside, the waves kept hitting the shore. Inside, new waves began rising in me. That night, I sat by the window, watching Dubai light up like a maze of unreachable dreams. And I knew, even at nearly 70 years old, I had stepped into an adventure my old life never would have dared to touch. A game, a role, a strange turn of fate. I woke when soft light from the sea slipped through the thin curtains, carrying a warmth I wasn't used to. For the first time in years, I had slept deeply, maybe from exhaustion, maybe because I felt temporarily safe, or maybe because a part of me had begun to feel treated like a real human being again. When I walked into the kitchen, Lena was already there with her gentle, familiar smile and a steaming cup of mint tea on the table. "Ma'am, you'll need to get ready today," Lena said. "The boutique opens at 10 o'clock. We'll leave in 15 minutes. "Boutique?" I repeated, surprised. "Outfits for tonight," she explained. "Mr. Amir wants everything perfect." I sat down, holding the warm cup with both hands to steady myself. Tonight, the meeting Amir needed me for, the meeting he said could determine his entire empire. And I, a nearly 70-year-old woman full of wounds, was preparing to play the wife of a powerful businessman. Life certainly knew how to twist in ways we could never predict. The black SUV drove Lena and me to a boutique in one of Dubai's most luxurious districts. The exterior was all glass, the doors opening automatically as we neared. Inside smelled faintly of sandalwood, with polished displays holding impeccably tailored pieces. Not flashy, not loud, but elegant in a way that demanded respect. A staff member approached, bowed to Lena, then turned to me with absolute courtesy. "Madam, Caraway, we've been expecting you." Madam Caraway. I heard the name like someone calling another woman. A stronger, more graceful woman. Someone who belonged in a place like this. But I still smiled, trying to stay composed. Lena guided me to the fitting area. 3 staff members brought several dresses, each crafted with exquisite detail. But when I saw the soft emerald dress with 3/4 sleeves and a modest sweetheart neckline, I knew immediately it was the one. It wasn't flashy. It didn't demand youth. It didn't try to turn someone into someone else. It simply lifted whatever beauty age had left behind. I slipped the dress on while the staff zipped it up in the back. When I stepped out of the fitting room, Lena placed a hand to her chest, her eyes widening in surprise. "Oh my, you look stunning." I stood before the large mirror, speechless. The woman in the reflection had neatly brushed silver hair, warm brown skin, and deep eyes carrying a kind of light I thought I had lost. The emerald dress softened the wrinkles around my eyes, not as marks of exhaustion, but as the story of a life fully lived. I raised a hand and touched the fabric near my chest. It had been so long since I had seen myself as myself. Not the mother constantly apologizing to her daughter, not the timid woman afraid of causing trouble, not the shadow someone else looked down on, but Helen Caraway, a woman who once had a life of her own. "How do you feel?" Lena asked. "I feel..." My voice caught for reasons I couldn't explain. "I feel like the woman I buried for far too long." Lena placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, giving it a small, encouraging squeeze. The jewelry came next, small, pure diamond earrings and a delicate platinum bracelet. Not overly extravagant, but elegant enough to take my breath away. "Mr. Amir chose everything," Lena said. "He wanted you to look natural, but commanding." Commanding. A word I thought time had washed away from me. Back at the estate, I hadn't even stepped out of my heels when Amir came out of his study. His gaze paused for a second when he saw me. I wasn't used to anyone looking at me that way, not with judgment, but with recognition. The kind of look that makes you feel like you matter. "The dress suits you well," he said, his voice low, with a hint of surprise he didn't bother to hide. "I just wore what I was instructed to," I replied, a little embarrassed. Amir smiled, a rare smile, and motioned for me to follow him into the small meeting room. On the table lay neatly stacked folders, project maps, and a brief family history. "Let's begin," he said. "You only need to understand the basics." He handed me a folder containing the history of the Al Nasser conglomerate over 3 generations, etiquette rules for traditional hospitality, summaries of the 3 key investors, and most importantly, the story of how we met New York. He said, looking straight at me, "We met at an art exhibition. You were standing in front of a Klimt painting, and I offered you a cup of mint tea." "I don't drink mint tea," I objected immediately. "You do now," he replied, half joking, half serious. I laughed softly. It had been a long time since I laughed naturally like that. Amir continued, "You only need to remember 3 details: where we met, what you liked about me, and why you agreed to marry me." I raised an eyebrow. "Why I agreed to marry you? Isn't that a bit much?" Amir leaned back, arms crossed. "Investors have sharp eyes. They'll ask why 2 people our age married so late. You'll simply say, because he made me feel like myself again." I went silent. A part of that sentence rang truer than I wanted to admit. Next came practicing gestures of familiarity. My whole body tensed when he stood close, but Amir was gentle, never pushing. "When we walk in," he said, "you take my arm like this." He extended his elbow and I placed my hand on it, still slightly trembling. Not too intimate, just natural, like a couple comfortable with each other. Then he showed me how to glance at him, how to nod slightly during introductions, how to rest my hand briefly on his back while passing through a doorway. "I'm not sure I can do this," I confessed. "You can," he answered immediately. "You have a composure I haven't seen in anyone else." I wanted to argue, but I knew he wasn't flattering me. He said it like someone who had observed me very closely. During a short break, I set the folders down and sighed. "Amir," I said, "I know what Zayn did to you, but you haven't told me everything, have you?" He looked at me longer than usual, as if deciding whether I had earned the truth. "Zayn," he said slowly, "brought a psychiatrist to my home. Not to help me, but to gather documentation to prepare a petition declaring me mentally incompetent." A tight ache spread through my chest, an all too familiar one. "Like Madison," I whispered. Amir dipped his head. "We both have children who want to erase us from their lives." I didn't answer. I only felt the pain of two strangers blending together, like two wounds from the same cut. He went on, "Tonight, if I fail, Zayn will have every excuse to take everything. The house, the company, the reputation, everything." Then he looked at me with a depth that made me turn away for a moment. "You're not just part of the act, you're the key to this negotiation." I had never thought of myself as the key to anything, especially not a deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But when he said that, I felt my spine straighten. Somewhere along the way, this stopped being about the $20,000. I wanted to help him for real, not for money, but because I understood what it felt like to have your own child try to erase you, to feel betrayed by the person who once was the center of your world. The afternoon light softened slowly, spilling gold across the white stone walls of the estate. I put on the emerald dress again and stood before the mirror one last time. Not the woman from last night, not the woman abandoned in an airport, not a victim, but someone stepping into the role of a wife, a partner, a woman with worth. Amir appeared in the doorway in a black suit and deep blue tie. When he looked at me, something in his eyes shifted. Recognition, trust, maybe even unspoken gratitude. "Are you ready?" he asked. I took a deep breath, rested my hand on his elbow, just as we practiced. "Ready," I said. And as we stepped through the doorway together, I knew I was no longer the discarded, directionless Helen Caraway. I had stepped into a role, not to deceive anyone, but to rise after years of being diminished by my own child. And for the first time in years, I felt strong again. If you're still listening to this story and feel that sometimes all it takes is one moment of seeing yourself clearly to stand up stronger than before, then let me know where you're watching from in the comments, or leave even the smallest thought so I know we're still on this journey together. We arrived at the Burj Al Arab when night was fully settled. The entire tower glowed like a massive ship suspended in the darkness, its golden light rippling across the glossy black sea. Even from a distance, the moving halos of light in the ocean breeze felt like a mysterious welcome to those entering its world. The limousine stopped beneath the curved glass canopy. A staff member opened the door with the signature reverence of luxury hotels. When I stepped out onto the marble steps, it felt like stepping into a scene from a film. Amir extended his arm. Following our rehearsal, I set my hand lightly on his elbow. "If you get nervous," he said quietly, "remember, you're not pretending to be someone else. You're simply standing in a place you should have stood long ago." I drew in a deep breath. I didn't know whether I deserved it, but I believed one thing. I had spent too long living as a mother whose worth was overlooked. Tonight, I would try living as a woman of value, even if only for 48 hours. The restaurant sat at the top floor where the entirety of Dubai spread beneath us like a map of gold. Soft amber lights glowed on thick silk carpets, and the tables were spaced perfectly, private yet close enough to hear the distant piano. When we entered, 3 middle-aged men seated at a large table stood up. They were polished, successful, with sharp, calculating eyes. I recognized the familiar, assessing glances, the same kind I had faced for 30 years in the hotel industry. Amir introduced me first. "Gentlemen, this is my wife, Helen Caraway." It was the first time he used the name Helen for the role. And what surprised me most was how naturally he said it, calm, assured, with no hint of hesitation. His voice made it sound as though he had called me that for years. The 3 investors nodded politely. One of them extended his hand and shook mine firmly. "A pleasure to meet you, Helen." I smiled, nodded slightly, maintaining the calm confidence Amir asked for. Not stiff, not timid, not overly warm, just natural. And to my surprise, I did it well. For the first 30 minutes, Amir spoke the most, explaining the strategy, the projections, the long-term vision. I sat beside him, composed, occasionally placing my hand on his arm the way a long married couple might. Then one investor turned to me and asked directly, "Helen, I hear you have extensive experience in hospitality?" The table quieted. Amir paused mid-sentence, watching to see how I would respond. I felt myself standing at a crossroads, lie for the role or tell the truth of my life. I chose the truth. "I managed a hotel in Arizona for 30 years, I said evenly. I trained staff, handled operations, managed crises, worked with partners and every kind of VIP imaginable. I've met the toughest clients, but I learned one thing. People only believe you when they see honesty in your eyes." The table fell silent. I feared I had said something wrong. Then one investor nodded slowly, with unmistakable respect. "Good," he said. "You speak very honestly. I like that." I exhaled quietly, but something warm rose inside me, a confidence I thought I had lost long ago. I wasn't trembling like Madison's mother anymore. I was standing here as an independent woman, with experience, with clarity, with a voice. As dinner moved forward, another investor asked a question even Amir hadn't expected. "Helen, what do you think about expanding into Qatar first? Any observations?" Amir turned his head slightly toward me, a silent invitation. He didn't guide me, didn't signal. He let me decide. He trusted me more than I trusted myself. I set down my utensils, dabbed my lips, and answered with the calm of a woman who had spent 30 years reading people and markets. "I think Qatar is growing fast, yes, but it can saturate just as quickly. They're pouring money into luxury tourism and urban development, but neglecting the mid-range sector. That creates higher volatility." The investor across from me raised his eyebrows, intrigued. I continued, "Oman, on the other hand, is slower, but steady. They're not chasing flashy mega projects, and that's what long-term investors should pay attention to." Amir looked at me for a long time, his eyes filled with surprise and gratitude. Another investor chuckled softly, nodding. "I already like you, Helen. Your perspective is very direct and accurate." The atmosphere at the table shifted noticeably. The conversation grew more animated, turning toward market analysis and long-term strategy. They kept asking questions, and Amir answered with a confidence I had never seen from him at home. And I understood. Their trust in Amir was growing, partly because of my presence, not as a role, but as a woman with her own viewpoint. At the end of dinner, when the staff brought out dessert, one of the investors pulled a stack of documents from his briefcase. "I don't think we need to wait any longer," he said. "If we can agree on the principles, we'll sign the memorandum of understanding right here." I felt Amir stiffen for a brief second in surprise. But just a heartbeat later, he regained his composure and slipped into negotiation mode. In the next 10 minutes, they discussed everything briefly, clearly, without circling around. And then, right in front of me, the three investors took turns signing a memorandum of understanding worth nearly $500 million. No fireworks, no applause, just the weight lifting from Amir's face, as if he had finally put down a burden he'd carried for years. As they shook hands to say goodbye, one investor turned to me and said gently, "Thank you, Helen. When the wrong person sits at the table, deals usually fail in the first few minutes. But tonight, I think you made us trust him more." I didn't know what to say except to offer a calm smile. On the way back, I sat in the car, watching the glowing city through the window. I thought I would be exhausted after such a tense evening, but strangely, I felt light. Amir stayed quiet for quite a while. I assumed he was tired, but then he turned toward me, and his eyes no longer looked at me as just a performer. "Helen," he said, his voice low and sincere enough that I had to look up at him. "Tonight you just saved my entire empire." I clasped my hands together, my heart skipping a beat. "You're exaggerating," I replied. "I only said what I know." "No," he shook his head. "It wasn't just your words. It was your presence. The way you stood beside me as someone with real worth. They believed you, and because of you, they believed me." I turned my face toward the window to hide my emotion. I couldn't remember the last time I felt trusted, valued, heard. For so many years, I had been the one in the background, cleaning up every mess, apologizing for things I never did, bowing my head before Madison's senseless anger. But tonight, for the first time in a very long time, I stood in the light, not to decorate someone else's story, but to affirm my own. As the car turned back into Palm Crescent, I suddenly realized something. I had stepped into this role hesitantly, but now, a part of me was starting to believe I deserved to stand there. And from that moment on, I knew the only thing left was to see where the future would take me and Amir during these 48 crazy hours. I thought everything would end after the dinner at the Burj Al Arab, that at nearly 70, my heart had already gone through enough upheaval for one lifetime. Leaving the Ghee restaurant, I expected to return to the estate, get some sleep, and then, the next morning, keep figuring out how to retrieve my documents and go back to America. Of course, I still had a role to finish, but deep down, I believed the hardest part was over. I had no idea the real challenge was waiting for me in that very living room. Amir stayed silent for the entire ride back. I knew that kind of silence. Not sadness, but the kind you fall into when you're turning over something so important in your head that you don't want to waste a single word. He leaned back in his seat, eyes on the dark-tinted window, his brows drawn together. When the car stopped in front of the entrance, he still hadn't said a word. We stepped into the living room. The air inside was warmer than outside, yet the space between us seemed to stretch farther. He stood in front of the fireplace, loosened his tie, set it on the table, then turned to look at me as if he were about to make a proposal he himself had wrestled with. "Helen," he began, his voice low and weighted, "I need to ask you something." I set my bag down on the chair and waited. "It has nothing to do with the $20,000, he said first, as if to clear away any misunderstanding. That only made me more curious. "Would you be willing—" He paused, drawing in a deep breath. "To marry me?" I froze. If he had asked me to play his wife again for another meeting, I could have understood. But marry him, at this age, a man I had known for not even 2 days? "I'm not joking," he added firmly when he saw I couldn't respond. I forced my voice to work. "Are you being serious?" "Completely serious." I braced a hand on the edge of the chair to steady myself. "Amir, we just met. I can't—" "This would be a contractual marriage." His tone was almost unnervingly calm. "No emotional obligation, no marital duty in the traditional sense, just a legal agreement." I looked straight into his eyes, searching for even the slightest hint of manipulation, but there was none. His gaze was sharp, clear, but not exploitative. He simply looked desperate. "Why do you need that?" I asked, my voice shaking for the first time. Amir walked over to the table, picked up a folder, and set it in front of me. "Zain is preparing to file a petition declaring me mentally incompetent." My heart clenched instantly. That phrase landed right on the wound I was carrying. Madison wanted to do the same to me. The Competency Review Board will look at my recent behavior, my wife's death, overworking, lack of sleep, stress. All of it can be twisted into instability. I sat down. But what does marriage have to do with that? Amir sat across from me, as serious as if we were negotiating a major deal. A person who is certified as of sound mind, who enters a legal marriage contract, signs major agreements and negotiates smoothly, cannot be easily deemed incompetent. I started to understand. "So, you want to prove to the court that you're fully lucid?" Amir nodded. "But I only have one way to do that. I need a legal wife for 6 months to close every loophole Zain could exploit to pull me down." I leaned back, looking down at my hands, which were trembling slightly. From a woman abandoned by her daughter in an airport to someone being asked to sign a marriage contract worth millions. My life was spinning. "You want me to marry you?" I repeated, needing to know I wasn't dreaming. "I want a contractual marriage with you," Amir answered without hesitation. 6 months. You have your own room, no physical contact, no strings attached, no expectations beyond appearing as Mrs. Al-Nasser at a few necessary events. I swallowed hard. "In return," he added slowly, "you'll receive $1 million when the 6 months are over." I almost couldn't breathe. $1 million. That number had never existed in my world. I had spent more than 30 years working hard, scraping and saving every penny for Madison, and she had never cared. $1 million wasn't just money. It was freedom. It was a secure old age. It was a life no longer tied to a daughter who was doing everything she could to cut me out. But I still had to ask, why me? Amir looked at me for a long moment, his gaze no longer cold but filled with rare sincerity. "Because you've lived through the same kind of pain I have. Because you understand how terrifying it is to be betrayed by your own child. And because I trust that you don't have bad intentions." I turned my face away to hide how deeply that struck me. After a long silence, I said, "If I agree, I have 3 conditions." Amir straightened, like a businessman who had reached the most critical part of the negotiation. "I'm listening." "First," I said, "you have to have Madison investigated. I need to know what she's done, what she's said, and what she plans to do with me. Amir nodded immediately. Done. Second, this marriage stays on paper. No one gets to think I came to you for money or status. I am not that kind of woman. I understand and respect that condition. Third, I looked him straight in the eye. If at any point during these 6 months I feel used or disrespected, I have the right to walk away, end the contract, and keep everything without any obligation to return anything. Amir didn't hesitate long. I agreed to all three. I touched the table, almost to make sure I still had sensation in my fingers. I was about to change the entire rest of my life with a single nod. I drew in a deep breath. All right, I said, I agree. Everything happened faster than I could process. The next morning, we went to a civil office in the city. It wasn't a lavish wedding, no diamond ring, no white gown, just me, Amir, 2 witnesses, and a judge signing the documents. I watched my signature dry on the last page, feeling as if I had just stamped the beginning of a chapter I had never planned to write. When we stepped outside, the Dubai sun was so bright I had to squint. Amir handed me a copy of the marriage certificate and said, "Now, you're safe." Safe. The word echoed in me like something rare and expensive I hadn't touched in a very long time. I unlocked my phone, opened my messages, and tapped on Madison's name. I attached a photo of the marriage certificate and typed, "You don't have any power over me anymore." The message went through instantly without hesitation. Not even 10 seconds later, she replied, "You've lost your mind." I stared at that line. Then, unexpectedly, I smiled. A small, light smile, as if a boulder had finally rolled off my chest after all these years. For the first time in so many years, I felt free. I had never imagined I could start a new life at my age. But in the days after the contractual wedding, everything began to shift onto a different track. Not the track of someone running from her past, but of someone stepping into a journey her younger self had never dared to try. Amir kept his word. We lived in the same estate but completely separately. He gave me space, respect, and distance exactly as promised. We both understood this relationship was born out of a need to protect ourselves, not from anything more romantic. And maybe that clarity made it easier for me to breathe than I expected. But the biggest change wasn't the marriage on paper. It was the work. Amir brought me into his new hotel project, or rather, he invited me with an urgency that told me he truly trusted me. "Helen," he said that morning as I walked into the dining room, "I need someone with real experience to oversee the hotel chain in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Oman. Someone the managers can't dismiss. Someone who understands hospitality the way you do." I almost laughed in surprise. "You trust me that much?" Amir set his coffee cup down on the table, his eyes sharp but warm. "There's no one else I trust more than you." I had heard that line once before, from my late husband, but this time it didn't carry romantic undertones. It felt like the respect of someone who truly saw my value. I accepted, and my life began to change. My work schedule became so packed that I had to buy a new notebook just to record every meeting hour, every trip, and every work objective. I went with Amir's team to review the hotels, evaluate the staff, restructure the service system, and work with partners. Some days I stood for 6 hours straight in a conference room training employees on crisis management. Some days I had to write reports until late at night, but I didn't feel tired. On the contrary, I felt alive again. 30 years of managing a hotel in Arizona had never exhausted me the way being Madison's mother did. But now I was using those very same skills to rebuild my own worth. For the first time in my life. Not for anyone else, Then came the trip to Oman. Amir wanted me to represent the company at a major presentation with the Muscat authorities. He said, "You are not just Mrs. Al Nasser. You are the new soul of this company." I froze. I, the woman who had been abandoned by her daughter at an airport, was now being called the new soul of the company by a powerful businessman. I knew he meant it. He wasn't saying it to make me feel good. On the plane to Oman, I looked out the window and saw the desert stretching all the way to the horizon. Once again, I realized sometimes life opens just when we think we have closed it. The presentation took place in a large conference hall with stone and wood paneled walls, warm amber lighting, and deep brown leather chairs. I stepped up to the podium with my presentation in hand. My heart was pounding, but I wasn't trembling the way I had at the Dubai airport. I talked about sustainable development. I talked about the experience I gained from years in the hospitality industry. I talked about something I understood better than any chart or report. No matter how beautiful your hotel is, what makes guests return is the feeling of being respected. That is the one thing you cannot buy. The room went silent. I thought I had made a mistake. But then the head of the Omani delegation smiled and nodded with clear approval. "Helen Caraway," he said, "you said exactly what we wanted to hear from a partner." By the end of the meeting, they agreed to sign a major contract, much sooner than expected. When I stepped out of the conference room, I almost couldn't believe it. I was no longer the woman left behind in an airport. I stood on my own feet in a room full of powerful people, heard, respected. That night, I called Harper. When she heard I had secured the deal in Oman, she burst out, "Helen, you came back to life." I didn't know whether I should cry or laugh, maybe both. In the weeks that followed, I began making friends, something I never expected to do at my age, and certainly not in Dubai, a place filled with people who lived at a much faster pace than I ever had. But it was here that I met middle-aged women from around the world: India, England, South Africa, the Philippines, Mexico. Women who came to Dubai to rebuild their lives after failed marriages, children who abandoned them, or financial ruin. We met in training sessions, in cafes, or at events I attended with Amir. Each of them carried her own painful story, but they still laughed, still stood tall, still dressed beautifully, and worked tirelessly. In them, I found something I hadn't had in 20 years in America: real friends. I learned how to live as a woman no longer defined by her children. I learned how to love myself. I learned to stop explaining, stop apologizing for things that were not my fault. And, above all, I learned how to stand tall. But life never stays peaceful for long. One afternoon, as I was reviewing reports in the office, Amir's lawyer, Mr. Rashid, came to see me. "Madam Helen," he said, his tone formal but unable to hide how serious it was, "we have the results of the investigation into Madison." I felt my heart drop. "She sold your house using a forged power of attorney." It sounded like glass shattering inside my head. No? Impossible. That document? There was only one copy in the safe. "She created a new one," Rashid said. "She copied your signature." I sat down, gripping the edge of the desk. But that wasn't all. "She also opened a loan of $32,000 in your name, and she bought a car, also in your name." I couldn't speak. My breathing grew heavy. Madison hadn't just abandoned me, not just humiliated me, not just tried to declare me incompetent. She had stolen from me, the cruelest wound of all. Rashid set the folder on the table. "We have enough evidence for a criminal case. You only need to give the word." I looked at those pages, every word slicing into my heart. I could sue Madison. I could make her pay. I had the right to do it. But instead, I said slowly, I don't want to file charges yet. Rashid frowned. Your reason, ma'am? I took a deep breath. I want to face her myself. I want to hear her speak. I want to understand what she has become. The disappointment, the anger, the hurt, all of it twisted inside me like a storm. But above all was one question. Why did the child I loved most make me live like I was invisible? Amir had been standing at the doorway for a while. He looked at me for a long time, his eyes filled with both sympathy and understanding. Helen, he said, this confrontation will not be gentle. I tightened my hands, trying to steady myself. I know, I answered, my voice firmer than I expected. But I've been running for too long, and I won't run anymore. At my age, I wasn't afraid of the desert, not afraid of Dubai, not afraid of this new life. I feared only one thing, that I would die without ever speaking the truth to the daughter I raised. I had become a new woman in the desert. Now I had to go back and face my own life. I wasn't ready to face Madison yet, but she came to me first, loud, furious, like a sandstorm hitting a quiet desert without warning. That day, I was sitting in the study reviewing the Oman hotel reports. Silk-like sunlight filled the room through the large window, and the breeze made the white curtains sway. I felt more at peace than I had in years, until the guard's voice crackled through the intercom. Sir, a woman is trying to get in. She says, she is Madame Helen's daughter. I froze. No, not now. Amir heard it too and immediately stepped toward the window. He looked down at the gate where a tall blonde woman was angrily pounding on the iron gate. Even from above, I recognized the anxious stance and the cold, sharp eyes. Madison. I stood up too quickly and nearly dropped the folder. Do you want to go down and see her? Amir asked. I swallowed, my throat tight. I didn't want to, but I knew running would only prolong the pain. Madison had come all the way to Dubai. This was no longer something I could avoid. I'll see her, I said, my voice small but steady. Amir nodded. I'll stand beside you, he said. The main doors opened. Madison stormed into the grand hall like a tornado, not waiting for anyone to guide her. Her face was flushed, her eyes burning with fury, her hair messy, her travel shirt still wrinkled. This is where you're hiding? She shouted, her voice echoing across the vast room. In this palace? With this man? A shiver went through me. Every word felt like a slap, but I stood tall, not bowing my head as I always had. Madison, calm down, she snapped, storming closer and pointing in my face. You've been brainwashed. Everyone said you went missing, and you sent me that insane marriage certificate. What for? To humiliate me? I stepped back. Amir stood behind me, his expression turning cold. You should watch your words, Amir said quietly. Madison turned on him, her voice dripping venom. Who are you? What have you done to my mother? Did you lure an older woman in so you could take her money? I felt heat rush to my face. Madison believed everyone was bad except herself. She never once looked at the damage she caused. He didn't lure me, I said clearly, each word steady. Shut up, Madison screamed. Dad died because of you, because you made him miserable. You were a burden his whole life, and now you've become my burden. I stood frozen. She had said those things before, but this time she said them clearer, harsher, right in front of Amir. My chest tightened. My face burned like boiling water had been thrown at me. In the past, I would have softened, gone silent, or trembled and apologized. But not today. Today I stood tall, and for the first time in my life, I said the words I had run from for years. You are wrong. Madison froze. She stared at me as if she couldn't believe I dared say it. Amir stepped forward, his eyes sharp. "Helen, let me." He placed a folder on the table in front of Madison. "This is the evidence of your actions." Madison looked at the folder like it was a snake. Then she yanked it open. First was the forged power of attorney, then the contract for selling my house in Arizona, then the bank statements for the loan of $32,000, then the car purchase under my name. Each page flipped like the sound of a blade being unsheathed. Madison's face turned pale, her lips trembling. "No, that's not mine." Amir didn't soften. "All of it carries your signature, and this," he handed her another sheet, "is a copy of the messages you sent your husband about your plan to take all of your mother's assets." Madison's face drained of color. You investigated me." "I protect my wife," Amir replied. "Wife?" Madison let out a bitter laugh. "I don't believe it. You've lost your mind. You've turned into a monster trying to take away my freedom." I looked straight into her eyes. For the first time, I wasn't trembling. "No," I said softly but clearly. "You did that to yourself." Madison opened her mouth, but nothing came out. In her eyes, I saw shock, confusion, and a very small trace of guilt she tried hard to brush away. I placed my hand on the folder and pulled it toward me. "Madison," I said, my voice so calm even I was surprised, "I'm not going to punish you with anger. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just disappointed." Her eyes blinked hard. "But you have to take responsibility for what you've done." I stood tall, facing her as a woman, not as a mother who'd been manipulated. "There are two choices." She narrowed her eyes, wary like an animal cornered against a wall. "Your choice." I raised my first finger. 1. You return everything. Money, house, assets. You sign a document admitting you used forged papers and promise never to repeat it. I won't press charges. You keep your career. Then I raised my second finger. 2. You refuse, and we go to court. You lose everything. Your job, your reputation, even your freedom. Madison's mouth dropped open. In her eyes, fear and fury swirled like smoke and fire. You wouldn't dare," she shouted, her voice cracking. "You never had the guts." I stepped forward. The distance between us shrank to just a few handspans, and I said in the voice I had wished for years I could use, "The old Helen Caraway wouldn't, but the Helen Caraway standing here now would." Madison's breath caught as if she'd been choked by the truth itself. I looked at her for a long moment, not with pleading eyes begging for love, but with the gaze of someone who knows she deserves a decent life. Madison turned away. Her tears fell, not tears of remorse, but the tears of someone spoiled, someone used to winning, now pushed into the shadow of her own actions. Finally, she let out a sob, spun around and ran toward the door. When the large door slammed shut, its echo in the vast hall sounded like the sigh of an old chapter finally cracking open. I didn't chase her. I didn't call her back. I didn't beg. I stood there, my hand resting lightly on the chair just to steady myself. Amir walked toward me, placing his hand on the back of the chair beside me without touching me, honoring the promise he made from the very beginning. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. I nodded, but deep inside, emotions rose like water that had been dammed for too long. Sadness, hurt, disappointment. But also something else. Something I had never felt. During all those years under Madison's weight, I felt light. Not because I had won, not because I had taken revenge, but because I had finally said what I had never dared to say. I had stood tall. I had looked directly at the pain, and I didn't collapse. Madison could walk away, cry, rage, hate. But I knew one thing for certain. For the first time in my life, I was no longer afraid of her. I thought after the storm that was Madison, I would get a few quiet days to breathe. But everything wasn't over. 3 days later, just as I finished an online meeting with the Oman Hotel design team, Amir knocked lightly on my office door. "Helen, I need to talk to you," his voice deeper than usual, unusually serious. I looked up. Amir rarely came into my office unless it was something important, and today his eyes carried something heavy, like a confession waiting to be spoken. I set the documents aside. "Amir, what's wrong?" He stood in front of the desk, spine straight, his hands clasped together. Amir almost never stood like that. Seeing him unsettled made my chest tighten. "Helen," he began, "about our marriage." I held my breath. "There is something I didn't tell you from the start. Something I think you should know." Amir rarely hesitated. Today he did. "I married you not only for the $450 million deal," he continued. "I also did it to counter the legal action my son, Zane, is pursuing." I froze. My heart skipped a beat. Amir glanced down for a moment, then looked back at me, as if taking responsibility for every word. "He's filing to have me declared legally incompetent, and a man who signs a lawful marriage certificate, runs a company, and has a wife at his side cannot be considered incapacitated." I sat in silence for a few seconds. Suddenly, every puzzle piece slid into place. The power struggle between father and son, the pressure he carried, the restless look in his eyes during important meetings, the messages from his Saudi lawyer that he read with his gaze turned away. Amir added, his voice honest like a confession, "Helen, I'm sorry I didn't say it from the beginning. I didn't want you to feel used, but I'm fighting to keep everything I built my entire life and to avoid falling into the hands of someone willing to put his own father in a psychiatric facility for money." I let out a long breath. I wasn't angry enough to scream, but something in me twitched, a scar touched, one Madison had carved. "So, I'm your shield," I said quietly. Amir closed his eyes for a second. "No, not just a shield." He sat in the chair across from me, looking at me intently. "Every bit of respect, care, and gratitude I've shown you is real. But yes, my original motive wasn't pure." Part of me sank, but another part, deeper, understood the man sitting in front of me. He had lost his wife. His son had betrayed him. Everything he'd built was at the edge of collapse. In that harsh desert, he'd had to fight like a lone wolf to survive. I understood, because I had once fought to survive when facing my own daughter. "I'm not perfect, Helen," he said, his voice rough, "but I don't want to build anything with you based on half-truths." He took a deep breath, then said something I could never have predicted. "So when this contract ends, I want us to try something real. No obligations, no pressure, no pretending." I froze. Amir continued, softly but clearly, "Let's try being friends, or more than that if you want. Not for the company, not for my son, not for Madison, only for us." My chest warmed in a strange way, but I was afraid too. Afraid of emotions, afraid of being hurt, afraid of opening my heart again at this age. "I can't answer yet," I said honestly. "I need time." Amir nodded. "I'll wait, as long as it takes." Then he left the room, closing the door so softly I barely heard it. I sat there in silence, my hand still resting on the edge of the desk, my heart suspended between two worlds. Amir saved me. He wasn't perfect, but he never saw me as a burden, And yet Madison, my own child, had seen me that way for years. I understood Amir, and I was hurt. That afternoon, as I was getting ready to go down for dinner, my phone vibrated. I glanced at the screen. Madison. I froze. My heart tightened. Second call. Third call. I finally picked up. Madison's voice was strained, no longer angry. "Mom, please, I need to see you, just you. Just me." For the first time, she sounded like someone who needed help, not someone shouting from above. "What's going on?" I asked. "Tonight, 9 o'clock, at the Atlantis Hotel, Suite 1824. Her voice trembled. "Please, Mom, come. I don't have anyone else." Something inside me tightened. I agreed. The Atlantis suite was large but dim, the curtains only half open. Madison sat on the sofa, her head in her hands, her eyes swollen and red. I had never seen her like this. No anger, no blame, no towering over anyone, just a young woman, lost. "I'm here," I said. She looked up. Her eyes no longer held fire, just ashes. "Mom," Madison choked out, "my husband left me." I froze. "Owen." Her voice cracked. "He said he didn't want legal trouble, didn't want to lose his career over family issues. He packed his things and left this morning." I couldn't guess what I felt. A bit of sorrow, a bit of bitterness, but also a harsh truth. Madison had finally tasted what abandonment felt like. She wiped her face, her voice rough as paper. "Mom, I messed up. I didn't know things had gone this far. I know I committed a crime. I'm not making excuses anymore." I said nothing. Madison clasped her hands so tightly her nails dug into her skin. "I don't want to lose you. I don't want it to end like this." I stepped closer. For the first time, she didn't recoil out of pride. She just curled in on herself like a child. "I know. You can't forgive me," she said. "I see that. But I want to fix things. I want to do the right thing. I want to become someone you can look in the eye without feeling disappointed." Her voice broke on the word disappointed. I sat down a short distance from her. The closeness reminded me of all those nights I held her when she had a fever, when she was bullied in elementary school. I once thought those memories had died, but they hadn't. They'd only gone to sleep. "Madison," I said quietly, "I'm listening. I really am." She looked up, eyes red, fragile in a way that hurt my chest. "But I can't forgive you right away," I said truthfully. "Some of the things you did weren't accidents or impulsive mistakes. You did them because you believed I wasn't a person, just a tool. I need time to trust you again." Madison clenched her hands into fists. "I know, and I accept that." I looked at her for a long time. For the first time in years, I didn't see a manipulator, didn't see contempt, didn't see blind rage. I saw a child who grew up with misunderstandings, expectations, and pains she never knew how to handle. But that didn't erase what she had done. The bridge between mother and daughter now felt like an old rope suspended over a deep gorge. One misstep and everything would fall, and I wasn't ready to step forward yet. Madison lowered her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, can you give me a chance?" I answered, "Yes, one chance, but not immediate forgiveness, not forgetting everything. It's a chance for you to prove you want to change." She nodded, trembling, tears falling like a light drizzle. That night, I stepped out onto the hotel balcony, looking at Dubai glowing like a galaxy spilled across the earth. The night wind swept through my hair. I rested my hands on the railing and understood one thing. A mother-child bond doesn't break in a day, and it can't heal in a single night. But the truth, no matter how painful, is the first step. I walked back into the room where Madison sat curled up, and for the first time in many years, I didn't see her as an enemy. I saw her as my daughter. A child who had wandered too far and had only just begun finding her way back. 2 years after that heavy conversation in Dubai, I still sometimes startle when I think about it. How could a 69-year-old woman like me, once abandoned at an airport with no money, no documents, look into the mirror today and see a completely different version of herself? But life has strange turns. When you think you've hit the bottom, it opens a new path you never expected. And if you're brave enough to walk into it, sometimes you'll find something you've never touched in your entire life. After the meeting in Dubai, Madison returned to America. 1 week later, I received an email from the bank. The $32,000 loan had been paid. The house sale money had been fully returned. The car under my name had been sold. Every transaction carried the same sender, Madison Caraway. No explanation, no long apology, just one short note. Mom, I will pay every dollar, no matter how long it takes. A few weeks later, I learned she had taken 2 jobs, one at a law office, one at a restaurant at night. She worked overtime almost every day. Her old friends said Madison no longer went out, no longer showed off. She simply worked, went back to her small rented room, and tried to live quietly. I didn't interfere. I didn't encourage. I didn't criticize. I let her walk on her own feet. Some lessons can only be learned through your own sweat. As for me, life moved into a completely new chapter. I officially became a senior advisor for Amir's hotel chain, not under the title of wife, but through real competence. The job took me through Dubai, Muscat, Doha, Phoenix, and sometimes even Europe. I lived among 3 places, Dubai, Oman, and the United States, as if I had finally found a new rhythm for my life. I wasn't clinging to one place or holding on to anyone to survive. I knew I was moving forward on my own strength. During a long business trip, I realized something older women often fight against, the sense of uselessness society quietly plants in them. Many of the women I met, over 60, newly divorced, widowed, or pushed aside by their children, all shared one common fear. I have no value anymore. I understood that fear, because I once believed it about myself. So I created the Second Wind Institute, a training and counseling program for women over 60 starting over. We taught hotel management, customer service skills, event planning, and life skills, everything they needed to become someone new. The first center opened in Dubai, 3 months later, Phoenix, then Manchester, Cape Town, and Mumbai. In just 2 years, the Institute grew into a network across 5 countries. And every time I looked at those women who were just like me 2 years earlier, I felt my heart warm. I knew I was doing the right thing, not for money, not for recognition, but because I didn't want anyone to stand alone in a desert the way I once had. As for Amir, things changed in ways neither of us expected. We still lived in the same villa, but no longer because of a contract marriage. That contract had ended long ago, but I didn't want to leave, and he didn't want me to go. One evening, as we sipped mint tea on the balcony, he said, "Helen, I regret many things in my life, but helping you rise and watching you walk confidently is the best thing that has happened to me in years." I looked at him, the Dubai night breeze brushing my hair, and understood. He wasn't talking about a contract, not about assets, not about the company. He was talking about us. No new documents, no terms, no declarations. We simply became life partners in our own way, companions, respectful, unbound, a kind of mature love, gentle yet deep. Zane, his son, was another long story. The day the court dismissed the petition for legal incapacity, I saw Zane look at his father as if realizing for the first time that he wasn't easy to overthrow. Amir didn't celebrate. He simply exhaled, like someone who had run a long, exhausting race. Zane later began therapy, not because of the ruling, but because he knew that if he held on to that hatred, he would lose more than his father. He would lose himself. Once I saw the two of them sitting together in the living room, not smiling, not chatting loudly, just quiet, peaceful silence. A silence I knew had taken years to earn. I quietly left the room, not wanting to disturb that rare moment. As for Madison, my daughter, she didn't turn into an angel in 2 years. People don't change that quickly, but she did change, little by little. Every month she sent me her payment receipts, not to prove anything, but as a reminder to herself that she was repairing what she had broken. Then one day, she appeared at the Second Wind Institute in Phoenix, in a volunteer t-shirt, no makeup, hair tied back, looking younger but also more fragile. I was so shocked I stood frozen at my office door. She didn't say, "I love you." She didn't say, "I'm sorry," like in a movie. She simply said softly, "Mom, I want to help, if you'll allow me." I nodded. She worked like anyone else, cleaning classrooms, guiding visitors, carrying supplies, organizing documents. No showing off, no complaining, no acting superior. Every time she saw me, she just nodded politely, not pulling me close, not running away. She was proving herself with actions, not words. There was no more hatred between us, but we were not close yet either. It was a bridge under construction, but at least it finally had a foundation. I slowly understood something I could only accept at this age. Forgiveness is not a decision. Forgiveness is a journey. A journey with days the heart opens and days it closes again. Days of hope and days of disappointment. Days you want to walk closer and days you must step back. But the most important thing, I was no longer drowning in anger or pain. I could stand, I could walk, and I chose to live my life, not for anyone else, not defined by anyone. This morning, as I stood on the balcony watching the sun rise over the Gulf, I realized I had grown far beyond who I was 10 years ago, and even beyond who I was 2 years ago. The woman abandoned by her daughter at the Dubai airport had died long ago. The woman living today is someone who rebuilt her life from the rubble. And when I looked toward the future with the soft morning light spilling over the brilliant city of Dubai, I knew one thing. Life did not take from me. Life has given back to me, right when I thought I had lost everything. Some gifts arrive at moments we don't expect, and they don't always bring immediate joy, but they touch the deepest parts of the soul, opening doors we thought we had locked forever. That day, I was sitting in my office at the Second Wind Institute in Dubai. Morning sunlight cast shadows of women practicing customer interaction on the walls. I had just signed a grant request when the receptionist said, "Madam Helen, there is a package from the United States. It says, 'For your eyes only.'" I was surprised. There was no sender listed. America is vast. Who would still send something to me? When I brought the box into my private room, a strange heaviness settled in my chest. I set it on the desk, stared at it for a long moment, then carefully sliced the tape. When the lid opened, I almost stopped breathing. Inside were old family photo albums, the covers worn, the edges yellowed, each photo wrapped in thin paper. My heart pounded. These were the albums that had vanished when my house was illegally sold. I once thought Madison had thrown them away or sold them like trash, yet here they were. somehow intact. My hands shook as I opened the first album. There was a photo of me holding Madison when she was 3 in the yellow floral dress I had sewn by hand. She was smiling, her eyes still clear, untouched by the thorns of life. I turned the page. Her 6th birthday when she demanded a cat-shaped cake, her first piano recital, her first day of school with the new backpack. Most photos had been digitally restored, the colors brighter, the tears repaired. Some had even been reprinted but kept the original vintage look. I sat down. Both my hands rested on the album as if afraid the memories would disappear if I let go. At the bottom of the box was a folded note. Madison's handwriting, still familiar but smaller, softer, without the arrogance stamped into every letter she'd ever written me. I opened it. Mom, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking you to forget. I just want you to have your memories back. That was all. No justification, no promises, no empty tears or dramatic repentance. I read those short words over and over, and suddenly my throat tightened as if something had gripped it. I set the note on the desk and touched the album cover, my hands trembling uncontrollably. A tear fell onto the photo, then another, and I broke down. But not from pain, not from sadness. I cried because I knew that, for the first time in many years, I had truly accepted my past. I didn't lose these memories only because the albums were taken. I lost them because, for years, Madison made me believe those memories were my fault, that I was a bad mother, a bad wife, a bad woman who ruined everything in our family. But as I looked through each photo, I saw something different. I had been a good mother. I had loved, cared, tried, and sacrificed. Not perfectly, but genuinely. And I understood the most important thing. I no longer needed Madison to change in order to be at peace. I had built my own peace, from walking alone through the desert, from tense meetings in Oman, from older women holding my hands as they regained confidence, and from myself, the woman who stood up when she thought she had nothing left to hold on to. My peace today didn't come from Madison apologizing. It came from no longer needing her validation. I set the album on the desk, stood up, and opened the window. The midday Dubai wind blew in, carrying the scent of the sea and the hum of a city always in motion. I thought of Amir, of how he quietly stood near me whenever I broke down, of how he respected my boundaries even while we lived under the same roof, of the nights he brewed tea without a word, just setting the cup down before walking away. Small gestures, yet warm in a way I never thought I could still feel at this age. Amir took nothing from me. He gave me time, space, and autonomy. The very things Madison once tried to take away. I smiled softly. In my peace, there was him. There was my work, the growing Second Wind Institute, and the women rebuilding their lives just like I did. There was a community I'd unknowingly created from the ashes of my own pain. And there was a small space reserved for Madison. A space no longer filled with anger, but with cautious hope. After wiping my tears, I sat back down. I took a photo of the album and Madison's note. I thought for a long moment, then sent her a message. I got it. Thank you. No blame, no questions, no overly warm embrace. Just a simple thank you. The thank you of someone no longer trapped by the shadows of the past. Madison saw the message but didn't reply. I knew she needed time. So did I. That afternoon, as I stood before the mirror getting ready for the Institute's fundraiser, I saw something clearly. The woman in the mirror wasn't a reflection of anyone else. Not Madison's mother, not Amir's contract wife, not the woman abandoned at the Dubai airport at 3 a.m. The woman in the mirror was Helen Caraway, a woman who rebuilt her life from the ruins with her own hands, a woman who had her memories, no longer haunted by them, a woman who had peace, self-created, a woman who had a future, self-chosen. And I knew that, at my age, I had become the strongest version of myself. My life no longer revolved around being someone's mother. My life revolved around me. I stepped out onto the balcony of my apartment in Muscat at dawn, just as the sun hovered low behind the pale gray limestone mountains and the Gulf of Oman stretched out like a sheet of blue silk. The salty breeze lifted my hair, carrying the gentle breath of a new day. I once stood before the sea feeling small and lost, especially in those early days in Dubai, when I still didn't understand why life had thrown me into such a distant land at such a painful cost. But today, looking at the vast ocean, I no longer felt swept away by the waves. I felt aligned with them, aligned with myself. Behind me, Amir stepped outside with 2 cups of hot cardamom tea. He was like a piece of the morning itself, calm, warm, unhurried. He set the tea on the table beside me and sat in the wooden chair next to mine. No words, just presence. A ritual we had kept for 2 years. Our relationship wasn't a Hollywood love story. No blazing passion, no grand vows, no dramatic fights, no sweeping reconciliations. It was quiet, steady affection. A soft tether between 2 people who had both been wounded too deeply, who knew they didn't need a storm. They needed an anchor. We never said, "I love you," but we chose to stay. Every day. And at our age, that is the deepest promise of all. My phone buzzed. A message from Madison. Every week on a random morning, she sent a short update. How therapy went that day, how she tried managing negative thoughts, whether she was making progress. I didn't reply to everything. Sometimes just a good job, sometimes nothing at all. But I read every word, and I realized the ice inside me wasn't as hard as before. I didn't forget what she had done, but I no longer woke in the night from anger or pain. I let my heart soften on my own terms. Forgiveness wasn't a free pass for the person who caused harm. It was a gift I gave myself. The Second Wind Institute kept growing in ways I had never dared dream. The opening of our new center in Lisbon drew hundreds. Silver-haired women with curved backs but bright eyes, women eager for a chance to restart careers, join support groups, or simply have a place to be heard. I stepped onto the stage, the golden lights catching the silver strands in my hair. I looked at those faces, faces shaped by life's storms, and spoke the words I had carved from my own 2-year journey. Happiness doesn't come from what we're given, but from what we rebuild. The room was silent for a moment, then a ripple of applause rose, gentle, honest. Tears pricked my eyes, not just for them, but because I saw myself again, that lost woman standing in the Dubai airport, and understood that if I could rise from that despair, they could too. When I returned to Muscat that night, Amir waited on the porch. He didn't offer grand congratulations. He simply adjusted the shawl on my shoulder and said softly, "You've helped more people than you realize." I leaned back in my chair, feeling peace spread through me like the city lights below. I was 70, and somehow my life, in the strangest way, was beginning now. No more Madisons shouting in my head, no more nights blaming myself for being a burden, no more fear of the future thinking I was too old to change. I had chosen myself, something I hadn't done in 40 years. And I wanted to end my story the way it deserves to end, with an open door. Because if I A woman abandoned at the Dubai airport at 3 a.m. with no papers, no money, no hope, could stand back up, rebuild my life, find new purpose, find a companion, and find peace. Then you, listening to my story, can too. Maybe you're 60, 70, or older. Maybe you feel left behind. Maybe you think life has closed its doors to you. But no, if I could do it, you can do it. And if any part of my story touched your heart, if you've ever stood at a painful crossroads, been hurt by family, or felt yourself drifting through life, know this: you are not alone. Thank you for staying with me until the end of my story. If you're still here and want to share your own journey, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Even a short hello means the world to me, because it reminds me we're walking this path together. If this story brought you a little warmth, please like and subscribe to hear more. Thank you, truly. I'm closing the final page of my old life and opening a new one, not to live longer, but to live deeper. And at 70, for the first time in my life, I can say this without trembling. I'm proud of myself.